So we made all the decisions, we gathered up all of the equipment, cycled our aquarium, and then we put fish in it. Now is where the frustrating part begins. Now you might start running into some minor problems, maybe some big problems, and you might have some questions about those things. That's what we're going to talk about on this episode of Tank Talk. Hey folks, it's John with KGTropicals.com. It's Sunday, October 5th, 2014. Welcome to this edition of Tank Talk. This is the fifth and final episode of our Fish Keeping 101 series, and today we're going to talk all about common problems and frequently asked questions. Now, of course, there's so many things that can go wrong with an aquarium, particularly in the beginning stages of the aquarium. I can't get to every single possible thing, but picked out a few of the good highlights, and we're going to get to those. And I think I might be able to help you through some of these problems that you might encounter in the beginning of setting up your aquarium. Before I get to that, I wanted to mention something real quick. I get a lot of questions about equipment. It's been kind of surprising to me, but I really like talking about it. So a lot of people have been asking me, what kind of microphone is this? What computer am I using? What camera do I use? If you want to know that kind of stuff, I could do a video about it if you want. I'd have no problem doing that. I love talking about technical stuff. So I'd like to know what you think down in the comments. If you want to hear me talk about the equipment that I'm using to do the podcast, the videos, I'd be happy to do it. And we'll see about that. You know, it'll be based on whether you want to see that or not. I've been getting a ton of questions about it, so I figured I would put it out there. I think it could be a lot of fun. So let's get right to it. Let's start talking about some of the common problems that you may encounter when entering into this hobby. One of the first things that comes up all the time, and one of the first things that you're going to search for, is new tank syndrome. That's one of those things that it's kind of a hot button item a lot of people talk about when they first set up aquariums, and they like to throw new tank syndrome around. It's just a fancy way of saying the cycling process, folks. New tanks need to cycle. They need to grow that beneficial bacteria so that you can safely keep fish in there. It makes the water safe for fish. During this process, fish can end up passing away. They can end up dying because of ammonia spikes, nitrite spikes, or whatever. And so we like to classify this as new tank syndrome. But if you ever hear about that, if you ever hear new tank syndrome, I don't know why I keep doing this, that's what it is. It's problems that arise during the cycling process. If you watched part 3 of this series, then you already know how to cycle the aquarium, so you shouldn't have a problem with this. But that's what new tank syndrome is when you have problems during the cycling process and it kills fish. It's very common. It happens. You've got to be on your game when you're cycling an aquarium, and then you'll never have to deal with that. The next thing that I get a lot of questions about is cloudy water in the beginning. People wonder, my water looks gray. I don't understand what it is. One of the first things I'll say to them is algae bloom. And they'll say, no, I don't have any brown or green or anything on my rocks or on my glass. It's not always on that, folks. Algae can bloom in the water, making your water look kind of gray. In the cycling process, algae also flourishes when it can absorb ammonia. So that's a great time for algae to bloom and do really, really well, is in the beginning of your aquarium's life when it has plenty of ammonia to feed on. So when this happens, when you get that cloudy water, you may also see a high rating of ammonia when you do a test. It makes sense because your aquarium is brand new. Ammonia is spiking because the bacteria hasn't built up to a level yet where it can combat that. And so algae is just doing wonderful. It loves it in there. You will find that once ammonia gets under control, that the algae should go away with it because it'll no longer have that wonderful ammonia to feed on. And then it'll just start feeding on nitrites. But anyway, algae is something that should get under control once your tank is cycled. It's not going to happen every single time. But if your water starts looking a little gray, that's probably why. This one is very common, and some of you may laugh, but I get it all the time. I can't keep plecos alive or algae eaters alive in my brand new tank. I get it all the time. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this, folks. First of all, plecos, even though they look like these hardcore little dinosaurs, they're pretty sensitive to water parameters. And so they may not make it through the cycling process. I always tell everybody, don't put a pleco in there when your tank is brand new. And their response is, oh, because there's no algae in there for them to eat? No, it's because they're sensitive to things like ammonia and nitrites. All fish are, but plecos in particular are sensitive, especially when they're really small. The other thing is a lot of people make the mistake of not feeding their plecos or algae eaters. They put them in a brand new tank and they think, well, they just eat algae. They survive on algae, so I don't need to feed them. It's wrong, folks. You absolutely do need to feed your algae eaters or your plecos. So make sure you're getting some of those algae wafers. I'll put a link to them on my website through Amazon.com. Make sure you're feeding these fish. They will eat fish food that falls down to the bottom, but make sure you feed them. It makes sense. They're fish too. They're not just workers. Feed your plecos and algae eaters. Okay, the last one that we're going to cover here as far as common problems go, of course, it's not the last one because the list would be as long as the dictionary if I was to talk about all of the different problems that I hear about. But the last one that I'm going to talk about is the tank will not cycle. This is another thing that I get a lot. And what happens is you heard me in the cycling video say that my preferred way of cycling an aquarium is to do it with fish in it. Reason for it, the fish create waste. The fish leave food laying around, like all kids do, and this produces ammonia. When it decomposes, it produces ammonia. If you don't have fish in there, it's not really going to produce that. So I like to have fish in there to get the cycle going. Sometimes people will start up a tank and they'll just leave it, and that's fine. Eventually it will get cycled, but it's going to take a lot longer because it doesn't have anything in it to boost the process of building up that ammonia. So it's going to take a while for nature to take its course. So for anybody who is not seeing their ammonia spike, they're not seeing the cycle even start, you need to put something in there to get it going. Things like we talked about before, a dirty old nasty funky filter cartridge. Squeeze out an old sponge filter. Take a handful of the brownest, dirtiest aquarium gravel you've ever seen and throw that in there. That's going to get this thing kick-started. Or you could use one of the products. Again, I have links to them on my website. You can use some of these products like Dr. Tim's, Quick Start from API, Cycle from Fluval. There's a lot of different products out there that can help to boost the process. And according to the bottles, it even makes it safe to have fish in there with them. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at this, but if your tank won't cycle, it's because it doesn't have a reason to. So now we're going to go into some of the frequently asked questions. We dealt with the problems. Now we're going to deal with some of the questions that I get on a regular basis. These are questions that people come into the store or they email me, what's a good fish to start with? I'm going to break this up into two different categories. One for common fish, the other for African cichlids, because since I am an African cichlid dealer, I get the question a lot of what are the best African cichlids to start with? But we're going to start with just the generic, what's the best fish to start with? I believe that the easiest ones to start with, and my recommendation to you, would be things like guppies, tetras, and barbs. There's a lot of reasons for this. First of all, they're very hardy fish. They can tolerate a lot. They can tolerate the abuse that you're going to put them through. Hopefully you don't. Hopefully you've learned enough from this series to not do that. But they are hardy little fish. You heard me say the word little. They're little and they stay little. They don't get huge. So this is a good thing for the beginner. The other thing, they're cheap. And I know that sounds petty, but you may go through some growing pains in this process of learning how an aquarium works. And so it's better to have $2 and $3 fish pass away than to go out and buy $60 large male peacocks and haps and have them die because you didn't know what you're doing. Experiment with these smaller, easier to keep fish, and if something bad happens, then it's not going to be as hard on your pocketbook. So just know that going in. Sometimes buying cheap is best when it comes to being the beginner. A lot of people want to use goldfish, and that's a great fish to start with too. But I don't want to get into the whole goldfish abuse debate because we could talk about it all day long. Get you some tetras, get you some barbs, something like that. And I'm sure that the pet store that you purchased them from, when you are done with the cycle, you know what you're doing. You're either going to buy another tank because you've fallen in love with the tetras and barbs, or you can take those back to the pet store where you bought them. A lot of times they'd be glad to take them back from you. Now, going into African cichlids, if you want to know what's the best African cichlids to start with, I always direct people towards mbunas. A lot of reasons for that. First of all, mbunas, they start with that beautiful color. Most of them have a lot of color, whether they're males or females. They're small. They're cheap. You don't have to have the biggest tank. I recommend at least starting with a 55 or a 75. but you don't have to have the biggest tank. Imbunas are very hardy. They're readily available. They're cheap. They're a great way to start in this hobby. If you ended up buying a bunch of unsexed peacocks, that's not a problem. But if you did that and you end up with a bunch of females, you may not fall in love with them. Imbunas, it wouldn't matter. So if you're starting out with regular freshwater community fish, go ahead and start out with some tetras and barbs, maybe some guppies. And if you're starting out with African cichlids, why not go through my Imbuna aisle and check those out? Great way to start. Now, this next one is one that I could talk about for probably 2 hours. You know the way I like to talk. But this next one I get from a lot of people that haven't even spent any money yet. They haven't even bought an aquarium yet. And that is, how much maintenance is involved? How much time do I have to commit to this? We're all busy. A lot of us are busier than we think we are. But we're all busy. We all have lives. We all have things that we have to do. And we need to know, how much time are we going to have to commit to this hobby every single week or every single day? Well, you don't need to maintain your tanks every single day, folks, but you will want to feed your fish at least every other day. The time it takes to do that, it's not that bad. So there's no excuses for that. But your maintenance, you do need to be on top of. You need to treat these animals right. You need to give them a healthy environment to be raised in. And so that is going to be a minimum of once a week that you're going to commit yourself to maintaining your aquarium, doing a water change, putting fresh water in there, cleaning off the glass with a sponge. Don't even pull out the bleach bottle, folks. Another thing we could talk about in common problems. Yes, it has happened. But anyway, cleaning the things inside the aquarium, getting the algae off and stuff like that, vacuuming out your gravel, doing a nice water change, and maybe replacing one of your filter cartridges. This is something that you're going to want to do every single week without exception to keep the tank healthy for the fish. Now, if you have a 75-gallon aquarium like this, you can expect maybe 30 minutes a week. There are products out there that you can buy, things like a Python system or the Aqueon water changing system. Links on my website for those. Those are going to very much speed up the process and keep the floor from getting all wet and all of that. They can certainly make the process faster for you, but even if you're doing it with a siphon hose and buckets, it's something that shouldn't take you any more than 30 minutes per week to do everything that you need to do. If you have multiple tanks, obviously it's going to take longer, but it may not be as bad as you think, because if you have multiple tanks in the same room, you're only pulling out all of your supplies and stuff once. So you just go from tank to tank, and it doesn't take that much more time. Now, I could go through how long it takes me to maintain the tanks in our shop and Lisa, but we won't get into all of that. One tank, you should not have to commit more than 30 minutes a week. Okay, so this next one goes right along with the question we just answered, and that is, how often should I be doing maintenance? We could have kind of made it one question, but, anyway. How often you should be doing maintenance, it's not a very cut and dry answer. I'm an African cichlid guy, so I tell people you should be doing a minimum of a 50% water change every single week. If your tank is fully stocked, which most of us African cichlid keepers do, you might even want to go to twice a week. If your fish are small like these and they're just growing up, might not be as critical. But if this tank is full of adult fish, I might be doing 2 50% water changes per week. Why? I want to keep it a healthy environment for the fish. I want them to look beautiful, have full color. So I'm going to do the maintenance that needs to be done for that. But if you have a community fish tank, maybe you have a lot of live plants in there which are going to help you to control things like nitrates, then you might be able to get away with doing water changes and doing your maintenance every other week. But again, I think that the best advice that I could give you is to get into the habit the same time every single week doing maintenance on your aquarium. If you go 2 weeks, your water's going to evaporate, the filter's going to be making a bunch of noise. Just get in the habit of doing it once a week. Your fish will be happy. They'll pay you back by being beautiful and vibrant and everything's gorgeous in the tank. Do it once a week and just keep everybody happy. This next one is one that I get a lot, whether it's to customers or to just people that I'm giving advice to. Why do my fish keep fighting? The very first question that I always ask anyone who says that is, what kind of fish are they? People putting in a brand new tank, they just threw a bunch of fish in, they were excited, they went to the pet store and they said, I want that one, that one, that one, that one, and that one. And they throw them all into the tank and they can't understand why they're fighting. Well, most of the time, probably 90% of the time, the reason why this is happening is because fish were put into that tank that are not compatible. You need to do your research, folks. Don't walk into the pet store and just point. Don't do that. Unless you have somebody in the pet store that is willing to spend the time with you to say, yay, nay, yay, nay. Most pet stores will have that. Most people that work in pet stores have enough knowledge to know, whether it's a big box store or not, they know what fish can go with what. They know that you shouldn't put cardinal tetras with 8-inch long goldfish. If you want to hear that story, listen to my podcast that uploaded last week, the episode that I had the Rick on with. It happened. Trust me. Most of the time, that is the case. You're putting fish together that are not compatible. You're putting Oscars with guppies. You're putting jaguar cichlids with, angelfish. A lot of times that's what is causing the problem. So before you purchase your fish, you can save this problem from happening by doing your research and realizing whatever fish that you want, whether they're compatible or not. Now, this last question is one that I get almost daily, and that is, I just bought my fish. My tank is fully cycled. I put them in the tank, and they're not eating. It's been 2 days. What's wrong? Okay. This one is another one that we could probably do an entire Tank Talk episode on, and maybe someday I will. But there's only about 3 million reasons why your fish don't eat in the first couple of days. If it's within the first couple of days, the first thing that I would always tell everyone is don't panic yet. The fish have been through a lot. They started out in a farm somewhere. They were transported to your pet store. They sat in the pet store in this new environment with all these people walking around. And then they got put in another bag and sent to me or driven home by me. And now I'm in a whole new environment. The fish have been through a lot. You need to give them a few days to calm down. And one of the first things that fish are going to do if they're not feeling well is stop eating. So don't panic right off the bat. Now, if it's been a week, then you might start getting concerned. But I can tell you this, a lot of times fish will eat and you just don't even know it. I've had people come into my shop and say, my fish haven't eaten in 6 months. Come on, folks, let's use some common sense. If the fish is still alive, it's eating something. So just because you don't see the fish eating doesn't necessarily mean that it's not. But if it's brand new and it's going through all of that stress of having just been transported and all of that, don't panic. Give them a couple of days. They'll settle in and they'll start eating. And that's it. We have made it through the 5-part Fish Keeping 101 series. I've had a whole lot of fun with this. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you've been able to get as much out of it as I have. If you're an information junkie and you want to learn absolutely as much as possible about this whole process, you may want to go over and check out our podcast at KGTropicals.com. Just check the podcast episodes page, and you're going to find all of these episodes, Fish Keeping 101, Part 1 through 5, in podcast form, which means they're 1-hour episodes. We go into much greater detail and get in much more depth with these different items than we do on the videos. So if you're an information junkie, I highly recommend you go over there and check it out. I have had a blast with this. Like I said, I hope you have too. Even if you're the advanced fish keeper, I hope that you've been able to maybe get something out of this series. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to check out our sponsors. Instead of talking about them all the time, I've just been putting them up here during the episodes while I'm talking. I hope you prefer that over me sitting here in every episode talking all about how you should support our sponsors. So it's a little thing that I'm trying to do. I hope it works out for them. I hope it works for you, and I hope it works for me. So thank you once again for watching this series, and we'll see you next week.